Hey, how's it going, guys? AirsoftMan819 here again with yet another Atari controller review. Today's review is going to be on an Atari 7800 controller, which was Atari's third system released after the 5200. The story behind the 7800 is pretty interesting. It was supposed to be released in 1984, I believe, but for some reason, I can't quite remember, it was shelved until 1986. Well, as you guys know, Nintendo pretty well took over the gaming industry in 1985 with the release of the Nintendo Entertainment System. So by the time Atari got around to releasing the 7800, not only did people forget about Atari, the 7800 was somewhat outdated in some ways. It did not output the composite video that the Nintendo put out. It also did not have the same audio quality. Although it closely matched the NES in graphics, it just was a step behind the NES. And by the time Atari got around to releasing it, people pretty well moved on. But they released it anyways, and they also released two different controllers for the Atari 7800. This is the controller that we got here in the United States, and I believe that we got the short end of the stick, no pun intended, because this thing is pretty awful. It uses the same basic design on the inside as the original Atari CX40 joystick, where it has the metal contact buttons that the joystick pushes down on, and the buttons also use those metal contacts. And it's the same issue as the CX40 joystick had. Those metal contacts wear out, they get dirty, and the controller loses its responsiveness, which unfortunately was the fate of this one and most of the ones that you find nowadays, unless they're refurbished or something. Not only that, but this thing is just freaking awkward. It's like the shape of it's like a cell phone or a TV remote, and the buttons are on the side and the joystick's on the top, so you're trying to awkwardly hit these buttons on the side while moving this stiff, unresponsive joystick around. And it's just not a very pleasurable experience to use this thing. I mean, it looks cool. I mean, you could use it for decorative purposes if you wanted to, but it's not really a good controller. In my opinion, it's not even as good as the original 2600 joystick, and that's saying something because I hate that thing. So, Europe was a lot more fortunate in the fact that Atari released a different controller in Europe, and it's of a much better design. It very closely emulates the Nintendo Entertainment System controller, so if you've seen one of those, then you've seen one of these, because they're essentially the same thing. This one's just a little bit more simple. It's obvious to see the Nintendo influence on this controller, and I think that's where Atari was going with this thing. And the reason I suspect this was not released in the United States was because Nintendo had a patent on this design, and I do not think that applied in Europe, but it did apply in the United States. I think it was something like that, or maybe they just thought that this controller would appeal to the European market more, when in reality they should have released this everywhere instead of just Europe, because getting these things now is very difficult to do, because like I said, they're only released overseas, not in the US, so you either have to buy them for an inflated price from somewhere over here, or you have to import them, which also costs money. I got this individual one brand new. I did pay a hefty $62 for it, which sounds ridiculous, I know, but I had a hard enough time just finding one of these, let alone what I spent on it. So this one was brand new. It was new old stock. It was in a sealed bubble wrap bag when I got it, and it still had the warranty sticker on the back, which was so old it just kind of fell off. But I mean, it is a good design. It is actually, in my opinion, the best controller Atari ever made, because Atari's never been really known to make good controllers. So this one is probably their best and their shining achievement in the world of controllers. And in my opinion, it looks good. It's got the silver Atari logo on the top here. It's got these like bright red buttons with the little finger grooves right here, and the buttons are overall pretty comfortable to use. I don't have a problem with them, and they are responsive. They don't have that clicky feel that the Nintendo buttons have, which I really like, but they are responsive and there's no issues with them at all, and they're labeled 1 and 2. Now, most 7800 games will use both of these buttons, but when you, because this controller is forwards compatible, I should say, backwards, I don't know. It does work with older Atari systems, like the old computers and the 2600, and when you use this on a 2600 or one of the old computers, you can, both buttons do the same thing, essentially. You also have this interesting D-pad joystick design. It's not necessarily a joystick, but with this joystick insert in the D-pad, it kind of emulates a joystick, and personally, I actually like the way it feels because it does emulate a joystick pretty well, even though it's just a glorified D-pad with a stick in it. But if you do not like the joystick feel, you can unscrew this joystick, and actually you can use it just like this with like a regular D-pad. And personally, I like this design because it fits two different preferences. If you prefer a joystick for Atari games, you can use the joystick attachment. If you prefer a D-pad, you can just use the D-pad like this. Personally, I like the joystick, but a friend of mine, he prefers the D-pad. So when he wants to use the D-pad, he can just take the joystick off, and when I want to use the joystick, I can just put it back on. So in that respect, it's a pretty interesting design. You can see the back here, it's got these grooves for extra grip. It kind of helps out a little bit. One thing about this that I do not like is the fact that the cord comes right out here onto the right side. And the way I am, especially with like a Nintendo controller, I like to rest my two index fingers on the top here. And this cord kind of impinges on that, and it's kind of annoying. Another thing is the cord is fairly short, so when you're playing, you have to sit fairly close to the Atari. Just uses the same connections as the Atari 2600, 7800, and all the computers from the day used. I believe it's a 9-pin connection. Has the Atari logo on the cord there. And the construction of the controller is overall really good. It's very solid. It's held together with 6 screws in the back. It doesn't have a whole lot of give in it. But because this is a new controller, the D-pad on it's fairly stiff, so we're still kind of breaking that in. But overall, if you do own an Atari 7800 and want to have the most pleasurable experience playing it possible, I would recommend finding one of these controllers. It's a lot of trouble to go through and a lot of expense, but you will thank yourself in the long run because this is so much better of a controller than that stupid joystick I can't even explain. So I hope you guys enjoyed this little video. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know, and I'll see you guys later.